Evelyn, a 78-year-old black woman, had spent her life fighting for justice and equality, but she never imagined she'd face humiliation at the hands of young, prejudiced police officers in her quiet hometown. Stopped for a broken taillight, her dignity was put on trial as they rummaged through her car, dismissing her as just another target. But when they uncovered a photo of Evelyn shaking hands with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the entire dynamic shifted. The truth about her legacy, a lifetime of activism and sacrifice, stunned the officers and captivated onlookers. Evelyn's unshakable grace and courage turned a moment of injustice into a powerful lesson, sparking a ripple effect that demanded change far beyond that fateful roadside encounter. The small, sleepy town had a reputation for its historical charm, but beneath its quaint facade lay an undercurrent of tension and prejudice that had never truly faded. It was on a sunny Tuesday afternoon when an encounter took place that would shake the town to its core, leaving a lasting impact on everyone who witnessed it. Evelyn, an elderly black woman in her late 70s, walked with a grace and dignity that belied her years. She had lived through eras of profound change, segregation, civil rights marches, and moments of hard-won progress. Evelyn had seen the worst of humanity and yet carried herself with an unshakable hope in the goodness of people. She was on her way home from a church meeting, her car packed with donated supplies for a community shelter, when the flashing lights of a police cruiser lit up her rearview mirror. Sighing, Evelyn pulled over to the side of the road. This wasn't the first time she'd been stopped, and she doubted it would be the last. She adjusted her glasses, gathered her license and registration, and rolled down her window as two officers approached. Both were young, their uniforms crisp, and their postures exuded authority. "License and registration," barked one officer, a tall man with a harsh tone. The other officer, shorter and stockier, stood back with a smirk that made Evelyn's stomach churn. "Of course, officer," Evelyn said calmly, handing over her documents. Her voice was steady, but she could feel the weight of their scrutiny. The taller officer glanced at her license, his eyes narrowing. "Ma'am, do you know why I pulled you over?" "No, officer, I don't," Evelyn replied politely. "Your taillight is out," he said, his tone clipped. "Oh, I wasn't aware," Evelyn responded. "Thank you for letting me know. I'll get it fixed right away." But the officers didn't move to let her go. Instead, the stockier one leaned closer, peering into the car. "What's all this in the back?" he asked, gesturing to the boxes of supplies. "Donations for the local shelter," Evelyn explained. The officer raised an eyebrow. "Shelter, huh? Got receipts for any of this?" Evelyn's heart sank. She had expected this kind of treatment, but it didn't make it any easier. "No, I don't have receipts. These are donations from our church." The taller officer let out a derisive chuckle. "A likely story." "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." Evelyn hesitated. "Is that really necessary? I've done nothing wrong." "Step out," the officer repeated, his hand moving to rest on his holster. With a sigh, Evelyn opened the door and stepped out. The officers wasted no time rifling through her car, tossing items carelessly onto the roadside. Passers-by began to slow down, watching the scene unfold. Evelyn stood with her arms crossed, her dignity intact despite the humiliation. "What's this?" the stockier officer exclaimed, holding up a small envelope. Inside were old photographs and a handwritten letter. "That's personal," Evelyn said sharply, a flicker of anger in her eyes. "Looks like evidence to me," he sneered, flipping through the photographs. One of them caught his attention, a black and white image of a young Evelyn shaking hands with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. "Wait a minute," the taller officer said, grabbing the photo. Is this you?" Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She looked at the crowd that had gathered, her gaze steady. Then she nodded. "Yes, that's me. That was taken after the March on Washington in 1963. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. The smirk faded from the shorter one's face. "And this," Evelyn continued, pointing to the letter in the officer's hand, "is a thank you note from Congressman John Lewis. He wrote it after I helped organize voter registration drives in the South during the Civil Rights Movement." The crowd murmured, and a few people began recording on their phones. The officers looked increasingly uncomfortable. "You see," Evelyn said, her voice rising with quiet strength, "I've spent my entire life fighting for justice and equality. I've faced dogs, fire hoses, and more hatred than you can imagine. And yet, here I am, being treated like a criminal for driving home from church." The taller officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we didn't mean." "Didn't mean what?" Evelyn interrupted. "Didn't mean to diminish me because of the color of my skin? Didn't mean to ignore the history I carry and the sacrifices I've made? Or didn't mean to get caught?" The stockier officer opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by a new arrival. A police sergeant, older and clearly in charge, pushed through the crowd. His face went pale as he saw Evelyn. "Mrs. Johnson?" he stammered. Evelyn nodded. "Hello, Sergeant Carter. It's been a while. You know her?" the taller officer asked, incredulous. "Know her?" the sergeant said, his voice tight with disbelief. "This woman is a local hero. She's the reason we have half the community programs we do today. Apologize, now." The younger officers stammered out half-hearted apologies, but the damage was done. Evelyn turned to the crowd, addressing them directly. "This isn't just about me," she said. "This is about a system that allows prejudice to fester. It's about ensuring that no one, no matter their age, race, or background, has to endure what I just did. We all have a responsibility to be better." The crowd erupted into applause. People stepped forward to help Evelyn gather her belongings, offering words of support and solidarity. The video of the incident quickly spread online, sparking a nationwide conversation about racial profiling and the treatment of elders in marginalized communities. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn became a symbol of resilience and courage. She was invited to speak at town halls, schools, and even police training seminars, sharing her story and advocating for change. The two officers were reprimanded and required to undergo extensive bias training, while the sergeant publicly apologized on behalf of the department. Evelyn, however, didn't dwell on the officers' actions. Instead, she focused on the larger picture. She partnered with local organizations to create new initiatives aimed at fostering understanding and unity. Through it all, Evelyn remained humble. When asked how she managed to stay so composed during the ordeal, she simply said, "I've lived long enough to know that anger alone doesn't change the world. Action does." Her story became a rallying cry for justice, proving that even in the face of prejudice and ignorance, one person's courage could inspire a movement. And as Evelyn continued her work, she knew that the fight for equality was far from over, but she also knew she wasn't fighting alone.